And Jake, remember, first person in conference, you begin.
Okay. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's telephone town hall. Tonight we'll be discussing the facts behind Measure 92 on your ballot this November. If you have a question at any time during tonight's event, please press 0 to ask a question. My name is Jake, and I'll be the moderator for tonight. And now I'd like to introduce our first guest. Our first guest is Teresa. Teresa is a registered dietitian and nutritionist with 13 years of experience helping consumers and families make healthy food choices. Thanks for joining us, Teresa.
Hi, thank you. I'm excited to be here. As a nutrition expert, I'm a firm believer that consumers should be able to trust their food labels, so that's why I joined the coalition to vote no on Measure 92.
Thanks, Teresa. Glad to have you here. And again, if you're just joining us, you've joined a telephone town hall on Measure 92. We know there's a lot of information out there, and it's really important to get the facts before you vote. You can always go to votenoon92.com, or you can press 0 at any time during the telephone town hall to be connected with an operator and ask your question of our panel. I want to introduce our second guest tonight. Our second guest is Kevin. Kevin is a fourth-generation farmer. He lives in Madras. He grows carrot seeds, alfalfa, and mint, and he's also formerly worked for the American Farm Bureau Federation. Kevin, thanks for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jake. It's really pleased to be joining and representing a farmer's perspective and hopefully answering a few questions and maybe correcting some misconceptions that are out there about what exactly GMOs are and what they mean for farm production and food production, and explain some of the direct and indirect costs that farmers are going to face with arbitrary labelings like would be required under Measure 92, and urge you to vote no on Measure 92.
Thanks, Kevin. Glad you can join us tonight. And we appreciate all of you joining us tonight for this telephone town hall on Measure 92. If you just joined us again, this is your chance to ask your questions and get the facts and decide how you're going to vote. This measure is very close, and we know it's very important for voters to have all the information before they make a decision. If you have a question, you can press 0 at any time during this call to be connected with the operator and ask the question of our panel. And, of course, you can also go to Vote No on 92 to learn more. The third guest that I have tonight is Dana. Dana is an advocate as part of the Measure 92 Coalition, which represents Oregon farmers and ranchers, consumers, businesses, and taxpayers from across the state. Dana, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, and thank you to all of you for spending some time with us tonight to talk about Measure 92. I'd like to take just about 30 seconds, if I could, and kind of give an overview of the measure. And then, most importantly, however, we want to hear from you. We want to answer any questions that you may have. So press 0 at any time, and then you will get your question answered live of any of the panelists. So let me talk a little bit about Measure 92. You know, to hear the proponents talk about it, it makes it sound like it's all about the right to know, but that's actually where Measure 92 fails. It fails on its fundamental promise to provide information to consumers about whether their foods contain GMO ingredients or not. It starts off, in fact, by exempting 2/3 of the food and beverage that's even sold in the state of Oregon. So already it provides misleading and inaccurate information. And these are thousands and thousands of food products that actually contain or were made with GMO ingredients. They just happen to get a special exemption. At the same time, Measure 92 is so poorly written that thousands of foods that actually don't contain any GMO ingredients would have to be labeled saying that they do. Now that's an inaccurate label. So while you won't get reliable information about your food, you will get increased costs at the grocery store because Measure 92 will increase the cost of food because it requires food to be specially segregated and specially handled just for the state of Oregon. And it's one of the many reasons that our coalition of consumers and farmers and taxpayers has come together to urge a no vote on Measure 92.
Thanks, Dana. And again, my name is Jake. I'll be your moderator on tonight's telephone town hall on Measure 92. This is a chance for you to get the facts and learn about the key issues with this measure before you cast your vote. We have a great panel tonight. Again, we just heard from Teresa Hardick. She is a registered dietitian. Kevin Richards, who is a farmer in Madras, and Dana Bieber, who's part of the No on 92 Coalition. If you have a question for any of our panel, you can press 0 at any time to ask it. Now let's go ahead and go to our first question. This is from Jerome in Portland. Jerome, why don't you go ahead?
Hi. Did this town hall receive any money from Monsanto?
Jerome, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer your question. You know, our campaign is funded by a couple of different groups. You'll find that our campaign is funded by organizations like seed companies, the very companies that give people like Kevin and other Oregon family farmers the tools that they need to be successful here in the state of Oregon. And the other part of the funders group of ours is the food companies. It's the same food companies who have been selling food in the state of Oregon for generations. And they, too, are contributors to the No on 92 campaign because they know that this is a costly and misleading measure.
Thanks for that question, Jerome. And again, if you have a question of your own, you can press 0 at any time. If you just joined us, you've joined a telephone town hall on Measure 92. This measure is very close, and ballots will be submitted in the next few days to decide what Oregon will do with our food future. The next question we want to take is from Wayne in Salem. Wayne had a question about the impact of the measure on food costs. Wayne?
Would be driving the increase in food costs? Specifically, why would it cost more? And which ones would cost more?
Hey, Wayne, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer that question for you. The food cost increase comes from the fact that all food has to be specially segregated and handled just for the state of Oregon. And Kevin can talk a little bit about the farmer perspective, but I'll tell you what that means. At the very beginning, what it means from the farmer perspective, they have to segregate every bit of their crops because there's a zero tolerance in Measure 92. So they have to specially handle all their crops and keep them 100% segregated, including when they transport the crops out. Then it goes to a food processor. The food processor has to keep everything completely separate. So there will be GMO food processing and non-GMO food processing. And the segregation continues all the way to the 2 distribution warehouses here in Oregon because they'll have to keep everything separate for the food that's sold in Oregon and the food that's sold elsewhere. All that segregation leads to increased costs. The other area that we could see increased costs is what food companies would do in order to avoid placing a misleading or inaccurate label on their product is they would have to remake their food using higher-priced non-GMO ingredients. And so those are where the costs really are. And, you know, it's not just us saying this. It's not our campaign. In fact, when the Citizens Initiative Review Panel took an extensive look at this issue back in August, and it was 20 independent citizens from across the state, they analyzed Measure 92, heard from experts on both sides, and they concluded that Measure 92 deserves a no vote. And one of the main reasons that they identified was the increased cost of food. And it's the same thing, frankly, that the State Legislative Revenue Office has indicated in their notes that it will increase the cost of food. So that's where it comes from. It's the complete segregation for Oregon-only food system.
Yeah, and Dana, I would just add that I hear a lot about there not being any cost for farmers, which I think unfortunately is just far, far from the truth. Not only is it a very large record-keeping burden, and by signing a legal affidavit, I'd be taking on some legal risk, which of course for smaller family farms like myself is quite burdensome and quite risky. But there's also a lot of direct costs associated with on-farm production and having to add a whole another arbitrary level of segregation. And so that could be just more labor, could be more equipment expenses, having to, in some cases, possibly buying a whole new fleet of farm equipment in order to make sure that during planting and growing and harvesting that I'm not commingling one crop with another. And then I think one really costly thing that some folks overlook is that depending on the crop, in order to actually successfully maintain that segregation and maintain the integrity of the crop, I might have to spatially separate different fields on my farm, and that could be by growing buffers and taking some land entirely out of production, or by just changing my whole crop rotation, which is not good for the profitability of my farm, but it's also not good, ideally for the sustainability of my soil on the farm as well.
Hi, I'm Jake. I'm the moderator for tonight's call. If you're just joining us, this is a telephone town hall on Measure 92, giving you the facts that you need to make an informed vote. If you have a question at any time, of course, you can press 0 and be connected with the operator and ask your question. We have a great panel tonight. We have Teresa Hedrick, who's a dietitian, Kevin Richards, a farmer, and Dana Bieber, who's an advocate with the No on 92 Coalition. Next, we want to go to Kirk in Portland. He has a question about what is a GMO and what is not. Kirk, you there?
Yeah. Yes. Hi. How are you? Yeah. One of my questions is, why do we need GMO products in the first place? And what would the GMO lobby want as for labeling of their products so that I can make my decision whether or not to eat GMO for my kids?
Kirk, that's a great question. So it seemed kind of like a two-part question. And the first part, why do we need GMOs? I think to start and answer that question, I think it's important to understand what exactly are genetically modified crops. And it's really misleading that this is anything significantly new than what scientists and agriculturalists and farmers have been doing for centuries. Virtually every crop that's grown on any scale has been genetically modified at some point in history, and that includes every organic and conventional and GMO crop that's in the food supply that's grown. So it's only the fact that modern genetically modified genetically engineering techniques have become more precise, more specific, and more controlled, so that we can have a little bit better idea of what exactly we're doing. And the reason why it's necessary is because to give you a short answer, the reason why it's necessary is it helps us grow more with less. And so what that means is it helps us be more productive, get higher yields, using less inputs of land, of fuel, of water, any resource that we use in the farming process. And so on my farm where we grow GMO alfalfa, that means that we get more profitable, more productive land or alfalfa on the land that we're growing, and also it ends up being a more sustainable crop because the herbicides that we use are less harmful to the environment. We have to use fewer of them, and overall we also go across the field fewer times with a tractor, and so those environmental and sustainability kind of benefits also affect our bottom line. And so I think that's the longer answer of how we can grow more using fewer resources with GMOs. And I guess I'd turn to some of the other panelists to answer your questions on how can we find out what exactly is in our food supply. But I would just say that it's really quite misleading that companies, farmers, everyone involved in the food chain isn't quite open about GMOs. I think that the regulators at the federal level, USDA, FDA, and EPA, have rightly looked at GMOs and decided that, or found that scientifically that there's not a difference in the characteristics that would justify the labeling. And so that's the federal labeling policy, which I think is the right jurisdiction to be mandating labels. And then beyond that, there are a lot of areas where you can find out more about different crops that are GMO.
Thanks, Kevin. And if you're just joining us, you've joined a telephone town hall on Measure 92. This is a measure that would mandate labels for some forms of genetically engineered food. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, if you have information that you need to make up your mind, you can press 0 and talk to our panel at any time. Next question we want to go to is Dr. Gordon in Gladstone. Dr. Gordon?
Yeah, the saddest thing about this whole conundrum that everybody's worried about is people don't use the scientific evidence that is available, and they say, well, so-and-so is just right because I feel it's right. So peer review is important, and this is just an abomination of somebody's written an article that they don't really understand the basics of. I think it's unfortunate, but I think it needs to be voted down fast.
Hey, Dr. Gordon, this is Teresa. I think you raised some good points. As far as the science go, we've seen that there have been over 1,700 studies done over the past 20 years that have shown that that GMOs are safe for us to eat. On top of that, the American Medical Association has reviewed all of the science and said that they think GMOs are safe as well, and they don't see the point for labeling. So yeah, you bring up great comments, and then on top of the science, I think there's the fact that millions of us have consumed GMOs over trillions of meals over the past 20 years, and we've not seen any adverse effects from it.
Thanks, Dr. Gordon. That was a great point. If you're just joining us, you're joining a telephone town hall on Measure 92. My name's Jake. I'm the operator. If you have any questions, you can press 0 at any time to be connected, and you get to ask your question of our great panel. For our next question, we want to go to Joan in Springfield. She has a question about the Yes campaign. Joan?
Yes. Who's behind, or what's behind the push to say yes to this?
Hey, Joan. Joan, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer your question for you. This is a recycled initiative that we've seen here in the state of Oregon a few years ago, and Oregon voters wisely rejected it then. It's this same out-of-state group that took it to California 2 years ago and then Washington last year. Both those states rejected this measure, and they've just recycled it and brought it back here to Oregon. But, the group that's behind it is an out-of-state group, and there's really 3 primary funders to it. One of them is called Dr. Bronner's Magic Soaps, and I'm not making up that name. They're actually from California, and they have a political agenda that they've been trying to push in states all on the western half of the United States for years, trying to get these labeling laws, which, by the way, is somewhat ironic considering the fact that Dr. Bronner himself has run afoul of FDA standards of labeling and has got himself in some trouble with the FDA regarding labeling. The second major funder to this is it's a company called Mercola, and it's by a so-called Dr. Mercola, and he has a big champion of this. It's hard to call him doctor, though. He's the same guy who opposes childhood vaccinations. He doesn't think that women should get mammograms, and he thinks that cancer treatments such as chemotherapy should never be used, and cancer instead should use other forms of treatment. So it's just kind of, to call him a doctor is a stretch, but he's a big proponent of Measure 92. At the same time, the Organic Consumers Association is another funder to this campaign, and they've been pushing these measures around the United States as well. They're kind of a strange one to align yourself with, too. Just recently on their website, they posted an article about how to cure Ebola, and in fact they said that the modern medicines and a vaccine is unnecessary, and instead it should be treated with intense hydration and some sort of a yeast. So it's a crazy group that they've aligned themselves with, but they're just trying to recycle initiative. It was wrong last time Oregon voters rejected it, and it's a wrong measure for us now. That's why it deserves a no vote.
Thanks again for joining us. I'm your host, Jake. This is our telephone town hall on Measure 92. This is your chance to learn what information you need to fill out your ballot. Ballots are due next Tuesday, and in fact, tomorrow is the last day to mail them in, and we want to make sure you have the information you need. If you have a question, of course, you can press 0 at any time to be connected and talk to our panel. We now want to go to Diana in Salem. Diana?
I am wondering if you could take one item, like if you grow crops like vegetables or whatever, and explain to me what would you do to genetically modify it. I don't understand what they do to it to do this. Sounds good if they can get more out of the land, but I understand that even if they label it, some things wouldn't get labeled anyway, which is strange. And if they do label it, how would they describe? Would they just say it's been genetically modified, or would they say we did this and this and this, and it has this and this and this?
That's a great question, Diana, and I know Dana has some details on the second part of that question on what exactly is exempt and how Measure 92 doesn't really provide reliable information on what's genetically modified and what isn't. But in terms of the first part of your question, how do you genetically modify a crop? On my farm, we grow a type of alfalfa for livestock feed, which is genetically modified to be tolerant to a herbicide, which is a very effective herbicide, but it's also more environmentally benign, and it's much safer for farmers like myself to use it and apply it, and just overall has a much less human and environmental impact than other chemicals that we might use. And so that's why we use it. That's what it does for us. in terms of how they genetically modified, it's basically just turning a switch, adding a gene in the plant, which is a very simple way to describe that, I know, but it's basically just turning it on so that it's resistant to that herbicide so that it doesn't affect the growth and the metabolism of the plant. And for the most part, many genetically modified plants use that technology and some other similar pest-resistant technology as well.
And I will also jump in there, Diana. You asked a question about what's labeled and what's not labeled. Well, actually, 2/3 of the food and beverage that's sold in the state gets a special exemption and isn't labeled, and that's going to include foods that actually contain GMO ingredients. And let me give you an example of one. For example, all meat and dairy products, even though they came from animals that were fed GE grains and injected with GE medications, they won't be labeled only because they get a special exemption. And it's important to point out, not only is that a really misleading consumers, at the same time, it conflicts with our 2 nationwide labeling standards, because there are 2 standards for consumers who prefer foods without GMO ingredients in them. They can look for the organic or non-GMO label. But Measure 92 actually conflicts with those 2 reliable and consistent labels. It's one of the many reasons we think it deserves a no vote.
Hi, and again, if you're just joining us, you've joined a telephone town hall on Measure 92. Tonight is your chance to learn about the measure, get the facts, and ask a question about what is helpful in making your ballot. Now, you can also go to Vote No on 92, or you can press 0 at any time to ask the question of our panel. Next, we're going to go to Laura from Portland. Laura, why don't you go ahead?
Hello.
Hey, Laura. Do you have a question?
Hi. Yes, I do. First of all, how long has GMO been into existence? When did they first start doing it?
The modern technology that we're using today in agriculture has been around for many decades, but it has gone through a very rigorous scientifically and regulatory review process, and was first commercialized in the 90s in some commodity crops in the U.S. And now it's in the last 20 years, it's grown on millions of acres all across the U.S. and all across the world. In I think about 12 or 13 different crops are genetically modified using modern technology.
Laura, did you have a second part of your question too?
Yes, I do. Does the nutritional value of GMO, does that change? Do we have less nutrition in GMO products?
Hey, Laura, this is Teresa. That's a great question, and I'd be happy to answer it for you. The short answer is no. GMO crops don't differ nutritionally than conventional crops. The FDA has looked at this closely, and there have been many, many studies done on it, and our bodies and the science show that there's no difference between GMO and conventional crops as far as nutrition goes. In fact, there have been some crops that have been modified to be better for us nutritionally, and I think there's more of those in the work in the future.
Thanks. And again, if you're just joining us, you've joined a telephone town hall on Measure 92. If you have a question that you'd like to ask, any information you need in deciding how to vote, press 0 and you can ask it at any time. Next question, we got to go to Mary in Medford. Mary, go ahead.
Hello?
Hey, Mary, go ahead.
Hi. I was just wondering, over in Europe, GMOs are labeled, and there's no extra cost to consumers. Would there be any extra cost to us over here?
Hey, Mary, this is Dana. I'd be happy to answer your question. A couple of points. First of all, in fact, you were right about there is some labeling requirements in Europe, but in fact the cost of food did go up in Europe. And in fact, that is why the EU, you'll find that government and scientist leaders have urged a reversal of that policy, because the cost, not only did the cost of food go up, but consumer choice went down. So we saw that in the EU. But I do need to also point out that Measure 92 isn't like the EU labeling standards. Actually, it's far more severe. There's a zero tolerance contained in Measure 92, whereas in the EU and in other countries there is a tolerance of up to 5%. So these measures are not identical to each other, but the real cost comes for Measure 92 comes from the complete segregation. And remember, in those other countries, you're talking about an entire country, but Measure 92 only affects 1/50th of a country. So when all the other food is made for the United States, that food cannot be sold here in the state of Oregon. So food for the state of Oregon has to be specially segregated, specially handled, or specially remade just for Oregon. And that's where the real cost comes in. And studies say it's about $400 to $450 a year. And that's where the costs are. And that's one of the many reasons our coalition has come together to urge a no vote. And in fact, it's the many reasons that I think it's 13 newspapers from around the state have urged a no vote.
Thanks for that question, Mary. And again, if you have a question of your own, you can press 0 on your phone at any time to ask that question. Next, we want to go to Juliana in Hillsborough. Juliana?
Hello, this is Juliana. How's it going?
Going great. What's your question?
Okay. I was going to say, I hope you guys can hear me. Hi. I just wanted to ask, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a doctor or anything like that. I've dealt with health issues, health and nutrition, blah, 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 a lot the last 10 years or so. Anyway, my question would be, I kind of got interested through that process. I got really interested in, genetically modified crops versus non-genetically organic, et cetera. But what I wanted to ask about is kind of that choice, having that choice of knowing what I'm eating, because I have noticed the difference. Scientifically, apparently there's no difference between GMOs and non-GMOs, organic, et cetera. Food tastes different, et cetera, for me anyway. So it works for me, and I would like to have that choice of not eating genetically modified food. So I guess my question is, why? I guess I would like that choice of knowing what I am eating and what is in my food. Do you guys have any input on that?
Yeah. Hi, Juliana. This is Teresa, and I'm a registered dietitian. I'd be happy to speak to that. I realize I read labels for a living, but the good news is you don't have to be a nutrition expert to be able to differentiate between GMO and non-GMO products when you're at the grocery store. Anything that's labeled organic or non-GMO verified is going to be GMO-free. So those existing labels provide a reliable way for consumers to choose products made without GMOs. And, that's one of the issues with Measure 92 is that it's going to conflict with the nationwide labeling that's already in place. And it's also going to make exemptions that people like you might not be fond of. For example, currently when you buy milk that is organic, the cows that produce that milk have not been fed genetically engineered feed, whereas under Measure 92, that milk would not be labeled as genetically engineered, even if it had come from a cow that had been fed genetically engineered food. So I think the existing label schemes provide a better way for consumers to like you to choose whether they want GMO foods.
And again, you've joined a telephone town hall on Measure 92. If you have a question, you can press 0 at any time. Now, we want to go to our first poll question tonight. This is a chance for everybody to weigh in. And as we've talked about, the election is just a few days away. November 4th is the deadline to get your ballot in. And if you don't get it in the mail tomorrow, the Secretary of State asks you to please make sure to drop it off at one of the many ballot locations available throughout your community. And you can go to the Secretary of State's website to find the closest location, or our own website, votenoah92.com. So our question to you is, most people have already received their ballot. When do you plan to fill out your ballot and vote no on 92 and return it? If you're going to return it tomorrow and get it in the mail, you can press 1. If you're going to return it in person sometime over the next few days before 8 o'clock Tuesday, press 2. Or if you've already got that ballot in and you're just a good citizen and listening in on this call, press 3. And of course, if you have a question of your own, you can press 0. So again, our poll question for you tonight is, most people have received their ballot. When do you plan to fill out your ballot and vote no on 92 and get it in? If you plan to put it in the mail tomorrow, you can press 1. If you plan to put it into a drop box sometime over the weekend or Monday and Tuesday, press 2. Or if you've already turned your ballot, you can go ahead and press 3. And of course, you can ask a question anytime if you want to talk to our panel. Now let's go to Hunter in Clatskanie. Hunter, go ahead.
I was wondering if you buy a commercially available tomato seed, such as the Oregon Spring, would that be considered GMO? And are GMOs processed by your body the same as non-genetically modified crops?
Hunter, that's a really good question. I'll try my best at answering the first part, and then I'm sure Teresa would be more qualified to answer the second part. I'm not familiar with those tomato strains, and to my knowledge, there aren't any commercially available tomato varieties which have been modified with modern genetic engineering, which would, in this case, require a label. But I think that also goes to the difference between, or rather the arbitrary distinction between some modern GMO technology and past technology. So many of the very tasty tomatoes that I grow in my garden or that we get in the grocery store have still been genetically modified, just not using modern technology like we use today in other crops.
Yeah, and to answer the second part of your question, this is Teresa, by the way, about how they're digested in the body. GMO and non-GMO crops are digested the exact same way. As soon as it all hits your stomach acid, it starts getting denatured, and the enzymes start kicking in to break everything down, so your body can't tell the difference.
And again, you've joined a telephone town hall on Measure 92. This is your chance to get the facts about the measure. You can go to Vote No on 92, or you can press 0 to get any question you want answered by our panel. It's important to get the facts, and this ballot measure is very close, which means that it's very important that everyone learn about the measure and make an informed vote. For our next question, we'd like to go to JD in Sutherland. JD, go ahead.
Yes, you're talking about you're talking about increased cost and for handling and trying to keep them separate. When switching to GMO, which are non-reproductive fruits or products, where you have to purchase the seed every year, is an increased cost. So,
Kevin, do you want to take that question?
Sure, yeah. So, JD, I think you're saying that although there are increased costs under this labeling scheme, that there are also costs to growing GMOs. And, of course, that's true. That's true with any sort of agronomic practice. There's costs and benefits. And that's true with GMOs. The seed that we buy in some cases is more expensive, but it's also much higher quality seed and then gives a lot of the sustainability and agronomic benefits that I mentioned earlier. So it's just it's an economic decision, and in this case on our farm, GMOs for alfalfa in particular have been quite profitable.
Thanks, JD. And again, if you've just joined us, this is a telephone town hall on Measure 92. If you have a question, you can press 0 at any time. Now, we have a question from Barbara in Florence. Unfortunately, she couldn't stay on the line, but she wanted to ask about whether Measure 92 is going to affect food costs. She's seen a lot of different stuff out there in the media and wants to know what's the facts. Can we help her?
Yeah, to Barbara and the others, I have to be honest, this is an issue that's important to me. I'm the mother of 3, and so I spend a lot of time in the grocery store, and I'm responsible for managing the family budget. And so the cost of food is a big part of our monthly spending. And so the cost of groceries is important to me. And we've talked a little bit about the cost of it, how it's the segregation that everything has to have. It's just for the state of Oregon. Because remember, all the food that's made in the other 49 states, none of that food can be sold in the state of Oregon. Instead, it would have to be specially handled or segregated or remade or made different or processed differently or labeled differently just for the state of Oregon. So it's all that segregation that's really expensive. At the same time, it's about what food producers would have to do to avoid having to put on a misleading or inaccurate label is it would have to remake their food with higher priced non-GMO ingredients. And there's been a lot of studies out there that have looked at those costs, and that's where we get to, they say about $450 a year for the average family, which makes sense if you think about it kind of in practical terms. I'll give you an example. Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream is a company that recently said they wanted to go GMO-free, and there was a newspaper article on how that conversion process was going for them. And even though they haven't made the conversion completely to GMO-free, the cost of their ingredients has increased by up to 20%. It's about a 5 to 20% increase in the cost of those ingredients. And so those higher priced ingredients, those are what cost money to consumers at the grocery store. But it's not just the cost to those of us as consumers. It's about a taxpayer cost, too, because remember, Measure 92 has to be enforced, and the Department of Administrative Services has said it'll cost a little over $14 million every budget cycle in order to have to enforce Measure 92, because they'll have to monitor and test thousands of farms and tens of thousands of food products and tens of thousands of stores across the state. And there's no limit on taxpayer money that can be spent, nor is there even a funding source that's identified. So costly to consumers, costly to taxpayers. It's why our coalition has come together and is urging a no vote.
Again, if you've just joined us, it's a telephone town hall on Measure 92. It's your chance to get the facts around the measure, and you can press 0 at any time. And we also want to encourage you tonight to make sure you get in your ballot. If you don't have a chance to vote by Halloween tomorrow, you need to drop it off at one of the ballot drop-off locations in your community. You can find those on our website, Vote No 192, or the Oregon Secretary of State's website. Our next question tonight comes from Shannon in Springfield. Shannon?
Hi, yes. Actually, this question was kind of brought up already and answered on, but I just wanted to kind of confirm it and make sure I heard it right. So basically, when we buy organic, and it's already basically GMO-free, and also companies, if it's GMO-free, they already label it GMO-free? Is that my understanding?
Hey, Shannon, this is Teresa. I was the one talking about that earlier, and that's a great question. I'm happy to answer it. So you're right, that if it's labeled organic, that it is non-GMO. There's another label out there that's non-GMO verified, so it is not necessarily organic. It might not have gone through all of the steps to become organic, but it does not contain GMOs. So either of those labels will help you pick a food that is not that does not contain GMOs. And these labels already exist and already do a good job of telling consumers what's in their foods. So that's why I feel like Measure 92 isn't going to add anything to that. And the fact that it's going to conflict with the labeling schemes that are already in place and then exempt 2/3 of the foods we eat, I think is just going to make it confusing for consumers.
Thanks for that question, Shannon. And again, if you have a question of your own, you can press 0 at any time to ask your question. We have another question here from Eric and Fossil. Unfortunately, he did not want to stay on the line to ask his question, but he said that he's seen a lot in the media about exemptions that would happen under the measure and some products being labeled and some not, and was hoping we could clear that up for him. Can we help?
Yeah, I'm happy to address the exemptions issue. This is Dana. Like as we mentioned and Teresa just said, 2/3 of the food that's even sold in the state gets a special exemption. So let's go over what some of those would be. That's all restaurant food, and that's all food that's packaged ready to go. So let me explain what that really means, the way they've written this. So if we were to go to the store and, say, go to a deli, and we're going to get a small bag of chips and a can of pop, that wouldn't have to have a label on it because it's packaged ready to go. It gets a special exemption. But if we bought that exact same bag of chips and the exact same can of pop at a Fred Meyer, that would have to be labeled. So you can see where it provides all this inconsistent information. Same thing as like we talked about all the meat and dairy products. None of those products will be labeled, even though the animal was fed GMO grains and injected with genetically engineered medications. That would just happen to get a special exemption, which conflicts with the nationwide labeling standards for non-GMO. So that's why I think Measure 92 really fails people, because there's consumers who really want reliable and accurate information if their food contains GMO ingredients in it. Measure 92 simply won't provide that information because of all the exemptions and loopholes, and that's why we believe it deserves a no vote. It's why papers across the state, 13 papers across the state, urge a no vote because they say that this provides inaccurate and misleading information.
Thanks for that question. Our next question comes from Matt in Grants Pass. Matt, I understand you wanted some question about what products contain GMOs. Hey, Matt.
Hi, I guess, yes, I am. I guess
Great,
my question is kind of, okay, my question's along the same theme here, and that last answer provided some clarity as far as which products would be subject to labeling. I do understand that labeled organic and labeled non-GMO are choices currently. But what percentage of the other products in the grocery store would be subject to this new labeling law? Are we talking just processed foods or prepackaged foods or fresh vegetables and whole grains? How many other foods out there are going to be labeled with if this passes?
Hey, Matt, I'll take the first part of this, and then I know Teresa has more to add. There's only a handful of GMO crops. I mean, it's things like sugar beets and soy and corn and cotton and a few other products. So it's not. So when you go to the grocery store, here's where the problem gets in about it actually being an inaccurate label, because some products like sugar, once sugar is processed, even if it comes from a GE sugar beet, or once corn oil is processed, even if it came from GE corn, once it's processed, it's stripped of all proteins. And GMO presents itself as a protein. So there is no GMO in the final product, no GMO in sugar or cornstarch or soybean oil or any of those finished products. There's absolutely zero. Yet it has to have a label on it saying that it does contain GMO. And that's an important point about Measure 92. It is so poorly written, it doesn't tell you which ingredients are GMO and how much. And that's a failing of it. So that's where you get to that misinformation. I know Teresa can speak more to that as well.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Dana, that I think the measure is misleading. The other thing I would add is that Dana mentioned only a handful of crops and some of the foods that would be labeled even if they had no genetic engineered ingredients. The other part of it is, some of these are in products in very trace amounts, but the measure would not tell you what percentage of ingredients had GMOs. So that's why I feel like it's not going to give consumers the information that they need. It won't tell them what's in their food, and it's potentially misleading.
Thanks for that question, Matt. We're coming to the end of tonight's telephone town hall. If you didn't get a chance to have your question answered, that's okay, because there's an opportunity at the end of this town hall to leave a voicemail for us, and we'll make sure to get back to you. And, of course, you can go to Vote No on 92 or Facts About 92 to learn more about the measure. And most importantly, vote. We only have a few days left to cast your ballot, and this is our chance to have our voice in our democracy. November 4th, next Tuesday, is the deadline, and if you don't get it in tomorrow, Halloween, in the mail, you need to make sure to drop it off at one of the ballot locations in our community. I want to hear once more from each of our panels. Our panelists. Oh, I apologize. We're going to have time for one more question. My question is going to Kevin, and it is about the best practices and how segregation is going to affect your ability to grow crops. Kevin, can you give us a little more on that?
Sure. Yeah. So the biggest thing is that Measure 92 would require segregation of a crop at every level. And so in order to maintain that segregation and maintain the integrity of the end product that I sell, I would have to, during planting, during any sort of cultivation, during harvesting, have to be very careful not to allow any commingling. So it's going to be a more labor-intensive and costly practices. It's going to require, in some cases, different equipment to make sure that there isn't commingling caused by, for example, the harvest equipment. And then the thing I worry about the most of is that on the farm, depending on the crop, I might have to maintain some space between different fields. And so that might require me to put in buffer strips and take some of my farm out of production. And it could also mean just entirely changing my crop rotation and changing the crops that I am able to grow profitably on my farm. And so, yeah, those are a lot of the direct costs that I'm worried would affect me immediately, not just on top of course, the record keeping and everything else. And then indirectly, I'm a relatively young farmer, and so I'm worried that this is just Oregon, just a requirement for labeling in Oregon, and so I'm pretty worried about the competitive disadvantage that puts farmers in here in Oregon. And I'm also worried that, it would effectively discourage a lot of research and innovation and new technologies for new crop varieties that could make us more productive and efficient in Oregon.
And it looks like we actually have time for even one more question tonight. And this one came in from Barry in Welsh's. He wanted to know about how the enforcement provisions of this would work. Who's going to enforce this law? How does that happen? And what is that going to mean for taxpayers?
That's a good question. We've spent a lot of time talking about how we all pay more at the grocery store at this, but we've got to think about what it means on tax day as well. The Department of Administrative Services, as I mentioned, they looked at this and they said a little over $14 million. And it makes sense if you think about it, because you've got to start at, like at Kevin's farm and farmers from around the state, and we've got, over 7,000 farmers here in the state. So there'll have to be an inspection-based program. So we test and monitor everything from the crop that you find on the farm all the way to the food processor as well, because you got to divide up those lines and you've got to, make sure that the food is actually getting processed, because it has to be a zero tolerance to comply. And then the segregation has to continue all the way to distribution warehouses. And then when it gets to the grocery store, there's got to be enforcement to make sure that the labeling is actually correct, the way it meets state standards. All of that is cost to taxpayers. And there's no funding source identified for this $14 million, nor is there even a limit that can be spent on this. So not only does enforcement come in the terms of the two state bureaucracies that are created, there's two new state bureaucracies that are created under Measure 92. So enforcement can come from there. At the same time, it can come from lawsuits. There's a lawsuit provision written into Measure 92 that says any citizen, and it doesn't even have to be a lawyer, but any citizen in the state can file a lawsuit against anybody from a farmer to a food producer to a retailer, anybody along the food supply chain line, if they think there's any violation of Measure 92. And you heard Kevin talk about it. That's one of the most concerning parts for farmers, because not only is there that lawsuit provision, but it's one more thing. The proponents wrote it such that if a defendant, such as a farmer, prevails in a lawsuit, he or she does not get their attorney's fees recoverable. But if a plaintiff prevails, they do get their attorney's fees. It's just another example of how misleading and unfair this is. It's why our coalition has come together with over 33,000 farmers and consumers and taxpayers. And like I said, 13 newspapers around the state, the Citizens Initiative Review Panel are all urging a no vote. And this is going to be a tight election, and we need every vote that we can have. And so we hope that those of you who are participating tonight and listening will vote no and encourage your family and friends to do the same.
Okay, I've been told that we've extended the town hall as much as we can. I do want to hear once more from each of our panelists, and again, encourage all of you to get your ballot in. And talk to your family, friends, and neighbors. This is a measure that's going to have a real impact on Oregon consumers and Oregon families, and it's important that everyone know the facts and to make sure that their voice is heard on Election Day. Kevin, do you want to give us a few concluding thoughts real quick?
Sure. Yeah, no, Jake, it was just a pleasure. I'm glad that you all invited me to represent a farmer's perspective and answer a few questions today. I think Measure 92 is one of the more dangerous measures on the ballot, and that's been on the ballot in a while. And I really am pleased that the No on 92 coalition is organized, and that every major farm organization in Oregon has come out against 92 as well. Like I mentioned before, I'm a relatively young farmer, and farming is a pretty tough business already, and so a lot of those immediate costs of segregation and labeling really concern me, but I'm most concerned about the long-term viability of my farm and of agriculture in our state, and so I think it's important to vote no on 92 and would encourage everyone else to vote no as well.
Thanks, Kevin. We appreciate you taking the time to join us tonight. Teresa, what else would you want voters to know before they cast their ballots?
Well, first, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I hope I answered some of the voters' questions. I think I would like them to keep in mind when they go to the ballots that Measure 92 is not going to tell consumers what's in their food. It won't tell them which ingredients are GMOs or the percentage of product that's GMO. 2/3 of the products we eat are going to be exempt from it, so I feel like it's a very useless measure, particularly since existing labels already provide a reliable way for consumers to choose products made without GMOs. Those organic or non-GMO verified labels that we were talking about, and there's tens of thousands of those products already available. I think food labeling regulation should be set at a federal level, so farmers like Kevin and small businesses and food producers are all treated equally. And I strongly believe consumers should be able to trust what's on their food labels. And so I think that's why people should vote no on Measure 92.
Thank you, everybody, for spending some time with us this evening to talk about Measure 92. You know, we've talked about the cost of it and how it's unreliable labels with misleading information and the cost to consumers and to taxpayers and how it hurts farmers. So we've really covered the issues, and I appreciate you guys spending some time with us to do that, have this conversation. You know, there's a reason that 33,000 people have come together and to join the No Coalition. They're fighting back this recycled initiative that has gone to other states, including here in Oregon, and been rejected each and every time for the same reasons. It's all costs and no benefits. So that's why we hope that you too will vote no on Measure 92. It's important, though, that the ballots get mailed in. The last day to mail them in is tomorrow, which is Friday. So before you go take your kids out trick-or-treating, make sure you put your ballot in the mail. If by chance, though, you don't have the opportunity to do so, not a problem. You can drop off your ballot up to 8 o'clock on Tuesday at any drop-off location. You can find those, for example, at libraries. You can find all the places where you can drop off your ballot on our website. Our website is votenoon92.com, and on there you'll find some information about where you can drop off your ballot. And again, thanks so much for spending some time with us tonight. We appreciate the great questions and appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
And again, if you didn't get a chance to get your question answered tonight, you can leave a voicemail at the end of this town hall, and we will get back to you. Thanks for your time, and remember, vote no on 92 by November 4th. Thank you so much.